All right, everyone, welcome to the session, Researching and Translating Circulation of Knowledge. We made a slight addition to the title and added teaching as well. So today's session is going to be quite interactive. We're going to throw a lot of things at you, and then we are hoping to get something back, which is what comes next. No pressure. So first, what we'll do is we're going to have Gordon come up and give an overview. For those of you who have not heard about the Cosmo Local project, Gordon will sort of give a history of it, and we'll go from there. And then Leslie will have talking a bit about like what does it mean to even write a textbook in global history of science. And then I'll talk a bit about what it means to be teaching history of science across a few different countries. And I'll give you a bit of context of what I think should come next. Then we'll have you talking in groups for 15 minutes with a prompt. And then we'll come back together and see if anybody solved the question of where do we go from here. All right, Gordon, you're up. Let's hear it for Gordon.
I was trying to hide at this one, but I'm press gang. Everybody probably in the field knows about the Situating Science project that lasted for 7 years or so. And it was a 7-year project to bring together people in the history and philosophy of science and science and technology studies across Canada to bring scholarship and research and pedagogy actions into collaborations with the cognitive and non-cognitive researchers and public sphere. And it was set up across 5 nodes across Canada based on 4 themes: science and its publics, historical epistemology and ontology, material culture, and geography of knowing. It's on a landscape in Canada where historians and philosophers of science get along better than in most places. We have this Canadian Society for History, Philosophy of Science, and we have a background in Canada of interest in historical ontologies and hacking, the group out of Quebec. And so there's not that kind of solitude-ish in Canada. And here was a real chance to do something wild under the new federal funding policies for creating knowledge clusters. And we were one of the first original clusters. And just to say the kind of things that were done under that big project, we had 2 national lecture series that took people and talks all the way across Canada that were sort of live streamed like this, recorded and broadcast across Canada on things like science and its publics, trust in the new sciences, the lives of evidence. And each year for that very long program, we took our lots of money, we had more money than God, to put together 4 workshops that were vetted by a group of specialists. 4 workshops per year across the country, all attached to them. And this is an interesting strategy that I think will work in the future, that each of the workshops, had to include people not the usual suspects. That is, we're not just speaking to our friends that we hung out with at conferences over and over again. And also that the applicants for the workshops had to present an aspect of a public event, much like we're seeing tonight with the two-eyed seeing, that was open to the public, that kind of created our shine. We had visiting scholars touring across the country or lodged in various places. Sundar Sarkar from India, Evelyn Fox Keller was one of our visiting scholars and national lecturer. She said it the best thing ever, supposedly. We had summer schools and internships in Canadian Museum. We had a workshop in the wonderful and not burnt down yet Banff Springs, and kind of seeding the evolution studies group into its powerhouse that it is now, and especially had a good traction with working with scientists and those that we rarely encounter in HPS and STS. Produced several books, Science and Narratives of Nature, Circulating Knowledge between Britain, China, and India, Objectivity, Spaces of Enlightenment Science, and so on. But in its penultimate year, we recognized a gap or a dearth And something was missing, because it was still snuggled both into Canada and also into a kind of Eurocentric position on thinking about science and technology and history and philosophy. And we were approached by scholars in India and Southeast Asia to see if we could use a collaboration as a catalyst to bump start. That word?
Yeah.
No, it's just. To upstart similar networks in Asia. And so in consultation with them, we co-wrote a proposal under the title, and it is an interesting one, Cosmopolitan and the Local in Science and Nature. And that notion of cosmopolitan had its, well, I can explain it with a medium discussion of why we chose that term and its relationship to the local, because philosophers are interested in the particular and the universal, and science studies and history of science, people are interested in the notion of how things move across from local to local to local. And we took this still entrenched notion of, and we took on or presented this as a counter to the still entrenched notion of a one-way dissemination of knowledge from imperial center to the periphery. And this notion is still held by celebrants of modernity and also its vociferous critics. So two categories, apologists and post-colonialists, some of them. And we wanted to disrupt that notion, and we moseyed around with notions of circulation of knowledge and its critics, the kind of things that we've seen in our first plenary and the rest of the plenaries, the social and technological imaginations, which was brought up today in one of the sessions, and the very useful notion that we get from some literary scholars and geographers and analytic gauche, of course, the author, the notion of the cosmopolitan vernacular, and also Chakrabarty's provocative decolonizing Europe. That's why we didn't invite Europe in at the beginning. In Canada, it's important because we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that came out after the expose of the residential schools. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had already called for decolonization of knowledge, whatever that might be. We'll see a bit of that tonight. And so we went with a series of workshops here and there. We actually got our grants from the government to do this. A series of workshops here in India and China and Singapore. A summer school out in India that we might hear a bit about tomorrow. Scientific objects and the digital cosmopolitanism. A workshop in Shimla, you know where Shimla is in the Highlands, at the National Institute of Advanced Studies on cosmopolitanism with some of the best speakers I've ever heard, and we lost Paul Brain in the Highlands. It's why we put up here, right? I got the Viceroy's room in the thing, and I was so impressed that the bathroom was bigger than my condo. And so you wonder why the India was pissed off. We sponsored Kim Colbert on decolonization, not equalizing reconciliation as a guest scholar. A number of other things went under this cosmopolitan, the local, and you'll see it on the conference website up at the side is about the project. And it ran for a number of years, increasing a kind of momentum against the kind of parochialism that we got from the Modi government in India, and the kind of backlash that we were seeing in North America. And then COVID struck, and we put it on hold for a stage, and what do we call it, reconnoitered, and then we did what we're doing today.
Okay. Thank you, Gordon. Okay. All right, and now I will hand the floor over to Leslie to talk about the fun experience of trying to write a textbook in the global history of science.
Right, very good. This feels much more formal than I was thinking that a discussion was going. So we're gonna do this fast so you can all talk among yourselves.
Yeah.
So some of you may know that my partner and I wrote a history of science textbook now some many years ago. When we were approached to do so, we talked about what does that look like, what we want from a history of science textbook that can be used for courses where people know nothing, and yet it says something about our discipline. And at the time, we had examples like Stephen Mason, who was the person who wrote the book that was, I think it was written in 1962, and when I read it in 1980, it was still kind of used, which is just the one damn thing after another kind of history. And we wanted to have something that actually spoke to what we're talking about in the discipline. So we called it from philosophy to utility. We talked about the relationship between science and the society, and tried to help in a narrative way through to it. And every time we now have 4 editions, and every time they say, well, there should be more non-Western voices, there should be more women's voices, there should be more Indigenous voices. We gradually added more and more. I actually was very proud of some of that we did, but eventually you can just keep adding stuff and saying that it's all right, but it becomes the Frankenstein of nothingness. And so I've said to the University of Toronto Press, no, we can't just do this by adding on, it has to be something different. And what does that different need to be? And so, in fact, one of our reasons for coming here is to think through, that what does that look like? And I think it looks completely different than the old story. I think it can, I feel like it can't just be me that writes such a thing. In fact, maybe it's a multiple person project. On the other hand, we also have to think about those first, second year students and what they can listen to and understand, and how much we want them to know about the importance of the subject that we're dealing with in a world in which people drink bleach instead of listening to scientists. And so you don't want to throw the baby out with bathwater, but on the other hand, I think we need to do something quite serious to think about science in a different way. And so what I'm hoping is that you will all decide what's best to do and how we do it. But increasingly, as I listen to us all, I think we still can get caught in the Europeans go and talk to people mode. And how do we do something that's different? Is it recentering? Where is the center of the scientific enterprise? What if it was in a different place? What if we did a different kind of global history? Some interesting questions to ask. So that's really all I want to say, except to say that I do think that there's never been more need for more people to understand about the history of science. And we don't want to just abandon the field to the popularizers that don't necessarily know what we know and are not going to be nearly as careful as we would be. So that's the whole time of having written this and being on the front about it, I get a lot of people in the discipline saying that I sold out, that we shouldn't have written a textbook. But I think if we don't do it, who does it? And so hopefully we can come away from this meeting thinking about what that looks like. So now I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks for that. I will keep this very brief because I want you all talking to each other. I just wanted to reflect on 2 things. One is how awesome it is to teach in our discipline. We have a really cool subject at hand that people are really interested in. And it's a unique place where you can get the people in sciences to take humanities courses through a history of science class. And those in humanities can learn a bit more about the sciences through our courses as well. This is really cool niche, and I think it's really important to maintain that disciplinary sense as we're moving into this more ambiguous historiographical phase. So that's just my flag in the field. I've had the opportunity to teach in the US, Canada, Germany, and the UK. And I've had this one class that I proposed called Science and Empire. So I just quickly wanted to tell how I adapted it across Canada and the UK. So in the class itself, students were able to read primary sources. So in Canada, we actually read parts of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. And it was sort of paired with articles such as Ian Mosby's piece about what happened in residential schools and some of the medical testing. So it's very important to not just have this broad view, but give the students in classrooms a local sense of what imperialism means. In Bavaria, in the town of Regensburg where I was in, students were surprised that Germany had an empire. And for them, it's still an understanding of what's happening, but also how it was not just a 30-year experience. And so we talked about what's happening in Namibia and why are reparations happening and what anthropologists actually did. So it's really important while we are teaching historical case studies to also look at what's happening in the news, what their family members will be reading and discussing. And they can take so much of that in the classroom and bring it back. And as some of you know, I also like teaching with anime. There's this really cool anime called Dr. Stone, which is how the world is frozen and for 3,000 years, and a lone genius restarts civilization. And I'm not kidding, the first 2 episodes are on Crunchyroll, on YouTube with English dub, and also sub. So if you understand the difference, you'll enjoy this. And so it's basically this idea of this guy who wears a shirt called E = MC², and he's going to restart civilization with all the knowledge we have. So we watched the episodes in my class, and the best experience I had was a student coming the next day saying he had not slept because he had watched 3 seasons. So it's that kind of experience I really enjoy. And now I'm in the UK and I'm teaching a module on religion and spirituality. So I get to talk about Jinn, which is something I've never had the opportunity to do, and I'm really excited. So I think it's really cool for us to talk as a discipline and where the opportunities are, and global and local, what those categories mean and where we are as educators. So what I will now slowly move to us is we do have one opportunity on a way to move forward. I'm going to present it to you, and then it will give you a prompt to discuss in groups. So we've heard from the editor of the BJHS, is Mandy Reese, and she's given us a open space to submit something that comes from this workshop, whether it's a pedagogical resource, whether it's an open conversation like we saw at ISIS. So if anybody feels like taking the lead on that, please let me know later. But that is one opportunity we have as a takeaway from this workshop. Mandy also happens to be the person I work with at York, so no, that's definitely a connection. And I think my colleague Sam Robinson is on the call as well, so all of us are a nice history of science group in the north. Yes, north. Okay, so before I get any more sidetracked, what we're going to ask you to do in groups is sort of have a discussion for 10 to 15 minutes amongst yourselves about the prompt. Where do we go from here? What do we do? And what kind of resources and actions would you like to see? So when you're discussing in your groups, please have somebody take notes. We'll try and get through a few of the groups when we come back together, but I'm hoping I can collect your notes and hand them to Peter Lee, who can then take them tomorrow at the closing session as well. So we have some form of continuity, and you have some food for thought over the next 24 hours. So just formulate yourselves in groups. And then we'll do 10-15 minutes of a discussion. Feel free to take it whatever direction you want, and then we'll take up some of the points at the end.
And the people online.
Yes.
Chat.
Yes, and the people on Zoom just form a little group. You can talk to each other.
On the chat.
Yeah, in the chat.
How big do you want?
Can we open up a waiting room for them? Sorry, okay, you guys go ahead. Just open up a. Yeah, so everybody just. There you go. Good. The trailer for dogs. Let me slide.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, right. I think. Yes. Oh, there you go. Perfect.
So what is the segment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's some analogy. Okay, now. Yeah.
Just a 2-minute warning.
The idea what they are. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll slowly start to wind down, just have the person want to speak. All right, I'm really happy with the chatter, but we're gonna have to call back to order. All right, I hope people in the Zoom room. Okay, so great, everyone. I like the sound of that. Who would like to volunteer to go first?
Yeah.
Any, all right, Melanie, you go for it. What were you guys talking about?
Okay, so we asked the next generation what was good, but before were the barriers, the first thing that came. It's probably no one's surprise, right? but also conferences to keep building networks. There's a number of institutional barriers that exist from many students being stuck in departments where there are no other historians of science to even barriers within the humanities in general. So for example, we love to give prizes to the author singular of the best paper, but we never support collaborative contribution, and then we just go and say, oh, our field is interdisciplinary, but we never celebrate this. So anything that would break down barriers in this respect would be fantastic. Another barriers that we had was translation, and that brings us to our last suggestions that to teach and to learn. So it'd be great to have a kind of anthology where texts from around the world would be given in their original language and translation, and or in a translation, and that these should bring fantastic collaborative projects.
Great. For those on Zoom, I'm just going to quickly repeat, the main points were funding, more conferences, addressing barriers to access, collaborative awards being given, more translation practices, and anthology that would encompass more sources that are being put in context. So fantastic, good start. Who would like to go next?
You can do it.
Elizabeth, just,
So
yes,
there was a,
Ian and then Elizabeth.
hi, Ian Stewart, sure. There was kind of a gathering around an idea of the field of STS, HPS, needing to draw alliances, I guess, with disciplines that are working on areas that are cognate to what we do, and vice versa, areas that we work with that have evolved and emerged both in this area of research that this conference is focusing on, but also more broadly. So it was a recognition that on the one hand, our field is very interdisciplinary as it is, but we could be more systematic and perhaps more strategic about connecting with initiatives and it doesn't have to be disciplines. It can actually be initiatives that are probably. I wasn't sure when I was taking notes where do we go from here, being circulating knowledge as a research momentum, or whether we were using that more broadly. I think Jim and Leslie were speaking about it in 10,000 foot. And yeah.
Thank you. It was sufficiently vague on purpose. So we're good. So we're now going to move to our folks online, so you can also take a look at them. Elizabeth, I think you're speaking for the group. So the floor is yours. You can unmute.
I'll speak for a little bit for the group. We didn't have that much time. One thing we did discuss, all of us being distance participants, is hybrid participation. We all appreciate that this is a fully hybrid conference, not just, people Skyping in, but that we can do everything. I think that's vitally important for broader participation, because there are so many people from so many countries that can't get visas to come to conferences and are just have no access at all. So more hybrid conferences of this type where everything is open for everyone would be vitally important. Another thing that came up is that is very rare to have sub-Saharan African scholars involved. And that would be good to actively try to look for collaboration and cooperation partners. And I think that's also a good bit of a visa issue, at least in Canada. People just don't get visas to come to things. So yeah, those are the two things that we talked about, and anyone else in the group who has anything to add, please do. Oh, and we also said we like the in-person conferences too, but the hybrid is very important for people who for various reasons can't come, whether it's visa or finance. So please continue with it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to the online group. Nice to hear from them. Who would like to go next? Just trying to. All right, Elise, go for it.
I was the note taker, so going through the main points we covered, firstly, seconding the idea that there's desire for some kind of resource that involves the translation of primary sources from many languages and sites around the world for teaching purposes, especially sources relating to the pre-modern period, the history of science. There was no consensus on whether what we need is like a published handbook type of thing or an online resource that can be repeatedly updated. But in any case, any resource that we create, it can't only be translation, but it should involve some kind of contextualized introduction or synopsis of the different sources so that they can also be used for research and teaching at different levels. There was also an interesting discussion about museums, how we can both use museums in our teaching and how historians of science can engage more with local museums. So several of us talked about how we actually use museums as a means of thinking about and teaching topics like science and empire. There's discussion about how historians of science could get involved in discussions about object repatriation that might be going on in their local contexts, as well as questions about museum curatorship and representation in those contexts. And then also taking inspiration from the name of the project, the Cosmopolitan and the Local, is the question of whether cosmopolitan itself is a Eurocentric concept that doesn't have an equivalent in every culture or language. And so more broadly, we thought about how to address this by being less casual about our language and categories. And that would apply, I think, also to both teaching and to research.
Brilliant. Okay, so I know there are a couple of other groups, so I'll ask you all to do is just bring your notes to me and I will hand them over to Peter. We'll continue this conversation. So please think through these ideas for the next little bit. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll have where do we go from here? I think I have 2 pages of notes already from the things that have been suggested. So hopefully we can put somebody in charge tomorrow. I think Gordon would like that to take the next phase of this in some format. But I wanted to end by actually showing you the Dr. Shaw trailer, because that's just me. So I'm also going to just share the screen so people online can see it, and then we can go from there. It's just so awesome.
This is why. Okay.